Hello everyone, this is AndresRestart, and today we are talking about how a leaker has just teased a huge revival to a Nintendo series on Nintendo Switch 2, and this particular tease has me very excited because I think it aligns with a theory I've had about a major series having a big comeback, and so that's what I want to dive further into today. But before going forward, let me take this moment to point out that I am aiming to reach 50,000 subscribers by the time the Switch 2 launches. So if you find yourself enjoying my content, I would appreciate it if you could subscribe and hit that notification bell. So the leaker in question is Nash Weedle. In the past, they've leaked some very interesting things, such as Metroid Dread, a revival of the 2D Metroid series, or Brothership Last Year, a revival of the Mario and Luigi series. So I pay attention to Nash Weedle. They have gotten some interesting things correct in the past. Of course, they were also incorrect a few years back about the release timing for Tears of the Kingdom. At the time, we just knew it as Breath of the Wild 2, so there is reason to take this with a grain of salt. They don't get everything right, but then again, no leaker out there really does. Either way, I think there's reason to have a conversation about this, and so this is what Nash Weedle is saying now. The next Donkey Kong game won't leave you indifferent. In other words, the next Donkey Kong game is going to have an impression upon you. That is the tease by Nash Weedle. And when I hear that, my mind goes in one big direction, that the next Donkey Kong game is an ambitious effort. It's not a cookie-cutter, safe choice for a Donkey Kong game. It's something that's a little bit of a bigger deal. Now, my bias has me leaning in the direction of it being a 3D Donkey Kong release as opposed to another 2D Donkey Kong release. We've only gotten one 3D Donkey Kong release, and that was back on Nintendo 64 with Donkey Kong 64, so it's been a very, very long time, decades, since the 90s. So Nintendo finally going back to 3D Donkey Kong game, I think would certainly leave an impression. Now, it could still possibly be a side-scrolling Donkey Kong game with some really crazy elements, but based off this tease, that's where I'm leaning. However, there is a bit more that is said about this project in this thread here, so when we scroll down, Party 3D Land asks, ¿Sabremos algo del 2 de abril? So basically, they're asking, do we know if this is going to be something we'll learn about on April 2nd for the Switch 2 Direct? And Nash responds, Tengo entendido que no, which means they understand that no, we will not be learning anything about this game at the Switch 2 Direct. It's going to be something that we'll learn about afterwards. So if we are to believe this rumor here, then that would mean we are not going to see Donkey Kong in the Switch 2 Direct. And you know, I kind of think this makes sense, at least based off my theories for how Nintendo is currently handling Donkey Kong. So let me explain what I've been thinking. There were a variety of codename leaks that came out last year from this user known as Midori, who's considered to be a very reliable leaker, perhaps a shady history in terms of their own personal dealings and their character, but in terms of their leaks, very reliable. And so they provided a series of codenames having to do with Nintendo projects, most of which seemingly are coming soon. Some have already been confirmed and have released, such as Edward with The Legend of Zelda Echoes of Wisdom and Banquet with Super Mario Party Jamboree, but there were others, and I think these others are going to be perhaps Year 1 Switch 2 titles, like SP Red for 3D Mario, Spiral for maybe a Splatoon title, Anna being some sort of follow-up to Switch Sports, Legacy being a new IP project from Monolith Soft, but there was another that Midori said they were unsure what was going on with this project. They hadn't gotten any updates on this particular one, which leads me to believe that this one out of all the other codenames probably isn't coming too soon. And this project has the codename of Silver Star. Now, what's interesting about Silver Star is that there is another codename for a big Nintendo game, Red Star. That's for Super Mario Odyssey. For the 3D Mario games, Nintendo always uses red to indicate it's 3D Mario, and the star part clearly pertains to Odyssey in this case. So when we see something like Silver Star, to me, that leads me in the direction of thinking that they're going to do something Odyssey-like, but not with Mario. And so with that in mind, this actually ties into a few other stories we've heard throughout the Switch era. There was one story going around a few years ago that at least elements of the Mario Odyssey team were working on some kind of Donkey Kong project. And then there's another separate story, this one is not a rumor but a report from several credible outlets, that Activision was indeed working on a 3D open world Donkey Kong project, but pulled out after just a few short months. However, Miyamoto was in love with that project, he was really excited about it, and so there was a thinking that after Activision pulled out, Nintendo decided to go forward with their own Donkey Kong project. And so what's interesting about these two different stories is the timing aligns. And it might also help to explain how in the 8+ years of Nintendo Switch, we've only seen one full-on project from the Mario Odyssey team, and that is literally Super Mario Odyssey that released in 2017, because yes, they've been working on the next 3D Mario for Switch 2 to come out in that first year, which we do expect to see in the Switch 2 Direct, at least a glimpse for it to come out these holidays, but perhaps they were working on another major project, and maybe that major project is the next new Donkey Kong game. And if we're comparing it to Odyssey, if we're talking about how Nintendo at one point was working with Activision on an open world Donkey Kong game, they canceled that project and then they went on to do their own thing following the excitement of that project, I think the overall implication here is that they want to go in the direction of a 3D Donkey Kong game. Maybe not open world necessarily, but perhaps they like the idea of Donkey Kong moving about in a 3D space, which is why they may have looked at what the Mario Odyssey team could offer for a project like this. Now, to be clear, I think the Mario Odyssey team, at least most of them, have been working on the next 3D Mario, which I expect to see in a few short weeks. But as Nashville was talking about here, this Donkey Kong project will not be coming out until later, so it may not even be totally complete yet, but perhaps it's far enough into development that Nashville would be privy to this, given that he seems to be privy to other really secret Nintendo projects. And so maybe Nintendo is saving a big hitter like Donkey Kong, maybe a 3D Donkey Kong game, for the second or third year of Switch 2, so we can have some momentum going into the generation after year 1 with some big releases. And since I'm talking about this, I would like to also mention that there's another big project that I kind of expect to come seemingly out of nowhere, but when you think about it, well, there should be something there. So the team that's making Mario Kart, that's the same team that made Mario Kart 8, we assume, and also the same team that made ARMS. They have not come out with a full-on game as well throughout the entire 8+ years of Switch. So we have these two huge Nintendo EPD teams that have only released one game in an 8+ year generation. That's more than enough time to make one huge project, and they should be well on their way to making a second one. So given the pedigree of these studios and what they're able to accomplish and their consistency over the many years of Nintendo, I have to think that it's not just Mario Kart and 3D Mario that these teams have ready. There is more. Well, maybe they're not ready, but I think they're maybe somewhat close to ready to be coming out in that second or third year of Switch 2, so we could be seeing perhaps even more bigger releases in this beginning of the Switch 2 era than perhaps some people are thinking. And so I'll also say yes, that the other codename products I've mentioned, I kind of expect to see them all in the Switch 2 Direct. The other one I'm somewhat skeptical of is Project Legacy, because Microsoft just released Xenoblade Chronicles X, but if the idea is that they've been working on this new IP throughout the entire Switch era, then it might be closer to finished than we realize, and it could be another big, surprising Nintendo game that will be out there early on for the generation. And so I think we're going to be getting a 3D Donkey Kong game relatively early on for the Switch 2, and to me that's going to be a very exciting revival. But what other potential revivals could we see on Nintendo Switch 2? Might we finally see the return of F-Zero or Star Fox? I actually think there's pretty good reason to expect both within the first few years of Switch 2. Will they show up in the Switch 2 Direct? I assume F-Zero is unlikely to show up in the Switch 2 Direct because we have another racing series in Mario Kart that's probably going to be there almost certainly. Star Fox could be a curveball showing at the presentation, but like I said, I think both have a pretty good chance to be revived during the Switch 2 era. When it comes to F-Zero, we did just get F-Zero 99 not too long ago, and there have been a variety of rumors surrounding F-Zero, perhaps a remaster of F-Zero GX, perhaps a brand new game. I don't think Nintendo goes back to F-Zero and does an F-Zero 99 if they don't have a bigger plan for F-Zero down the road, so I think it's more so a question of when, not if. And with us transitioning over to the Switch 2 in this beginning of a new generation, it's a perfect opportunity to bring back some different franchises like F-Zero so they can find a new audience. Now, as for Star Fox, there have also been rumors of a Star Fox movie being in the works from about a year ago, and more recently, Takaya Imamura, someone who's worked on the art for Zelda, F-Zero, and Star Fox, has actually been actively talking about Star Fox a lot lately. Now, they are retired from Nintendo, so they may not know for sure, but it is highly curious that they continue to talk about it and say they absolutely believe both a Star Fox game and movie will happen. But what do you all think? Do you believe that Donkey Kong is going to make an impressionable comeback relatively soon, early for Switch 2? And then how about something like an F-Zero revival, or a Star Fox revival, or others? Let me know in the comments below. This is AndresRestart, thank you so much for listening and watching, and I'll see you all really soon. Take care. Bye.